Ninja Gaiden 3, to sum it up in one word, disappointment. But what can be said that hasn't been said 100 times already? At what point did the Ninja Gaiden franchise go so horribly wrong? Personally, I think it was when Team Ninja decided to take the franchise in a bold new direction. You know, I had a friend once who decided to take his car in a bold new direction. Didn't end so well for him. But getting back on topic, when the new head of Team Ninja said that Ninja Gaiden 3 would go back to basics, I was ecstatic. Back to when crappy camera angles weren't your biggest enemy, back when your weapons didn't suffer from too much variety, and back when enemies didn't drown you in shurikens like that one guy from that one movie, Dances with Ninjas. I returned to the 2004 Xbox Ninja Gaiden, who could ask for anything more. But no, sadly I was completely wrong, because back to basics meant a return to the NES Ninja Gaiden trilogy. Now there's nothing wrong with drawing inspiration from a collection of 20-year-old games. Even NG1 and 2 had callbacks here and there. But they were simple callbacks, little details that if removed or changed these games could easily be their own franchise. NG3 is so obsessed with emulating its ancestor that it forgets all the things that make it cool in the here and now. How so, you may ask? Well, let's start by looking at the
level structure.
Now NG1 and 2 weren't exactly Skyrim in terms of open world design, but they had a lot of distractions to keep you from just rushing towards the end. There were hidden items, additional power-ups and weapons, collectibles, extra enemy encounters, a key hunt here and there. What I'm saying is that these distractions gave the levels an exploratory component, which was enough to create the illusion of a large sprawling level. While the levels themselves were basically oddly shaped hallways with platforming sections, you had optional pathways you could explore to toughen up Ryu Hayabusa. And in a game like Ninja Gaiden, where you needed every edge you could get in battle, it was well worth your while to traipse through every inch of every stage. NG3 scoffs all of that and completely embraces its 2D roots and gives the player one single pathway through every level with no exploratory options, essentially turning the game into Final Fantasy XIII, a trek down a linear corridor with combat that's just as uninvolving, but more into that later. Then, to add insult to injury, Team Ninja decided to add a separate button function designed to show players where to go, essentially giving players a map to a one-way hallway. GT Cross. It's like this game was developed for the Wii or something. Oh wait. While you really can't get any more linear than a 2D NES game, the original games at least had strong platforming sections to break up the monotony. So what does NG3 offer? Well, it does have the prerequisite flying bird flips, wall running and pole jumping sections, each with a 50% chance of breaking off once Ryu starts doing his business. Yes, the developers were playing a lot of Uncharted 3 at the time. Also, in keeping with its 2D roots, the game occasionally has you wall climb, which could have been a cool feature, but it adds nothing but annoyance to gameplay. In the original games, wall climbing could be used to avoid enemies, bypass boss attacks, and reach items that you couldn't normally get to. In NG3, wall climbing's only purpose is to connect one part of the stage to the next, turning the awesome ability into a portable ladder function that you needed to use to continue the game. Also, Game Design 101, pressing up, down, left and right to maneuver on walls and ropes. Good design. Unintuitive use of the L and R trigger for something that could be easily done with a joystick. Bad design. But any attempt to add variety to gameplay with pre-rendered platforming is wholly lost when measuring up to the colossus that is NG3's hack and slash component, which brings me neatly to my next point.
The combat.
When the reviews came out saying that you could go through most of this game mashing quick attack, I thought they were exaggerating for comic effect. That type of nonsense would get you killed in the first stage of Ninja Gaiden 1 and even more so in Ninja Gaiden 2, but no, they were telling the truth. Seriously, try this out at home if you own the game. Go to the first stage, hold your controller with one hand and mash away on the attack button for every fight. It's ludicrous how effective this is. Oh sure, on higher difficulties the strategy becomes less efficient, but then you learn that the flying swallow plus obliteration technique can take care of all human-sized enemies regardless of difficulty. This is another annoying aspect of the game, which is a call back to the days of old, because as difficult as the original Ninja Gaidens were, it sure wasn't because of the combat. All your enemies except bosses died in one hit, and enemy placement was more of a hazard than the actual enemy attacks. And when you had a bunch of them in front of you, you just mashed the attack button until they all died, which is an all too accurate description of the combat in this game. But you know what? This could have worked if they had stuck to keeping the one-hit kill system. Have all your enemies die in flashy instant kill moves and your only concern would be blocking and dodging attacks. that would have been consistent at least, but Team Ninja decided to throw their old fans a bone and include the combo-based gameplay of NG1 and 2. This marriage of different play styles results in the most randomized fighting mechanics in a third-person action game I've ever experienced, because while you're furiously attacking your enemies, you don't know what exactly is going to happen. Every couple of seconds control gets wrestled from the player so the game can show you a flashy instant kill move. And while this is quite a spectacle, there's no real control as to when it's going to happen. Sometimes you'll slash a guy 7 times before he goes down, then you'll go straight to the next guy and he gets cut down in one cinematic hit. The whole experience gives me the feeling that this is a game that would rather be watched than actually played, which shouldn't surprise me since the director of this game is a proud member of the Games Should Be More Like Movies Club. And before any of you defenders of this game accuse me of complaining out of ignorance, I assure you there is no pattern to the instant kill system, and I've tried hard to figure it out. Maybe it's every third hit of the combo that triggers the instant kill. Maybe it's every fourth hit of the combo. Maybe if I complete a combo on an enemy the last input is an instant kill. Maybe if I tap Y after the enemy is showing signs of damage. Maybe if I tap X after signs of damage. Maybe if I attack them after I've inflicted a certain amount of damage. Okay, fine, maybe if the game just randomly feels like having me kill an enemy in a cinematic fashion, thus removing any sort of strategy from the game as a whole.
It's just so random.
The only consistent thing in combat is that if you manage to land a cinematic hit on an enemy, your next hit becomes a one-hit kill. You'd think this would be an awesome feature adding some strategy to how you play, but good luck telling where the nearest enemy is when the camera's busy zooming in on your sword. Actually, that isn't so much of a problem since all your attacks home in on enemies regardless of where you're facing, so I guess it works out, in a retarded kind of way. Another consistency is that if you manage to damage your opponents to the point where they're face down or on their last legs, tapping any attack button near them will finish them off in a spectacular fashion, most of the time anyway. But it does raise the question of why you would want to waste time attacking dying enemies who no longer pose a threat. This isn't like Ninja Gaiden 2 where enemies got more dangerous after you've hacked off a limb, thus prompting you to finish them off quickly. Here enemies on the verge of death become totally ineffectual, and will eventually die if you leave them long enough. So why spend the extra effort? Actually, there is a reason for this. It builds up your magic meter, yet another callback from the original games which leaves me with many questions. Gone is the magic system of the previous Gaidens where you had a set number of shots of magic. Now you get a bar of magic that fills up with every attack, and you'd think that having such a ridiculously long magic bar would have various uses to add some kind of variety to the combat. Well no, the magic bar only has one purpose, and that's to summon a dragon to kill all on-screen enemies. And I have to say, the effect of mighty room clearing magic is somewhat lost when the 8 enemies you kill with get instantly replaced with another 8 enemies being drip-fed from some off-screen enemy reservoir. But what really gets to me is that if NG3 was so dedicated to mimicking the games of old, why didn't it do more with the magic? In the original games your magic bar could be used to utilize various sub-weapons you found throughout the levels. Throwing windmill shurikens, casting fireballs, and having shadow clones around definitely would have added some flavor to the unbelievably bland combat, but no, giant fire dragons is all we get. It's like in an effort to mimic the original trilogy, Team Ninja just went over a bulleted list of features in those games, then added them to their new game without checking how these features worked in the original. However, there is one thing NG3 nicked from its ancestor that works just as well as it did in the originals, and that's
the story.
It almost seems silly to bring up the story of a Ninja Gaiden game. The original Ninja Gaiden trilogy was praised for the presentation of its narrative back in the NES days, but despite that the stories weren't very good. All 3 games had this bad habit of having characters and plot points haphazardly pop in and out of the story, and in some cases just straight up disappear for half of the game. There was also really awkward character motivations, and a lot of the stories are driven by Ryu blindly agreeing to go where everyone in the plot tells him to go. In fact, these stories give Ryu a more Ninja for Hire persona than opposed to the man on a mission feel of the later games. And while I guess the Ninja for Hire idea is more in line with how real ninjas operated, aping reality doesn't always make for the best entertainment. While the original Ninja Gaiden stories weren't especially good, the future stories didn't fare much better. Ninja Gaiden 1's story was pretty much a rehash of the Master System Ninja Gaiden story, which was a throwaway tale even back then. And Ninja Gaiden 2's story was a paper-thin excuse to have us trek around the world. But whatever the weakness of the story was, it was picked up by the strength of awesome gameplay. And you know what? In the interactive medium that is video games, that's alright. So while the Ninja Gaiden franchise have had stories that were completely forgotten during gameplay, NG3 won't let you go 5 minutes without reminding you that it has one. Cutscenes about events happening 500 miles away triggering in the middle of levels, support characters constantly gabbing off in your headset, the ice level being the worst offender, long wordy cutscenes where our hero might as well be invisible, plus you know those sections in a lot of modern video games where control is taken away from you in order to hear some really important dialogue. Yeah, those show up as well, as if enough control wasn't already taken from the player. On top of the overly intrusive storyline, in tradition with NG3 kicking it old school, Team Ninja also got the original writer of the NES trilogy on board for the project, Masato Kato. Now I'm sure Mr. Kato is glad that he gets to revisit his past glory and write a story for something other than a bunch of obscure RPGs that no one's ever heard of, but it's almost scary how his knack for writing ninja stories hasn't evolved in the past 20 years. Like in the old games, the story revolves around a ninja working with the CIA to solve a global crisis. While Kato keeps the themes of the old Ninja Gaiden games intact, with a couple clever throwbacks that I personally enjoyed, the story suffers from the same problems that the original trilogy had. Characters haphazardly popping in and out of the story, plot points being all over the place, really awkward character motivation, and again this is another story where the only driving force is where you're going where everyone in the plot tells him to go. So at the very least we can congratulate Mr. Kato for faithfully recreating a Ninja Gaiden story for our generation.
Conclusion.
So that's Ninja Gaiden 3, a linear procession of repetitive pre-rendered action sequences tied together by an incredibly meddling and silly story. Actually that description could be used to describe a lot of current generation games, which makes it all the more tragic that I have to apply it to a Ninja Gaiden game of all things. And for what? Why all this modernization for a franchise that's been unashamedly old school this whole time? Well, ironically all in the name of going back to basics I guess, but despite spending the last 10 minutes blaming the awfulness of this game on it being too willing to drop to its knees and suck off its predecessor, I believe we still could have gotten a decent game out of all this, if Team Ninja had actually been 100% committed to the idea of going to its retro roots, rather than lazily throwing in mechanics from its older games into its newer games, we could have gotten something truly awesome. Maybe if someone who knew how to properly mix all those elements together was heading the project, we could have avoided this whole tragedy. For those not in the know, the reins of the Ninja Gaiden franchise got switched from the guy who made Ninja Gaiden relevant again, to, well, this guy. Now you may ask yourself,
who's this nebbish-looking amateur techno scrapped up off the street to direct this game?
But that couldn't be farther from the truth. This guy was a member of the original Team Ninja. He was the project lead on Ninja Gaiden Black, the best one in the series. He even directed Ninja Gaiden Dragon Sword, which was a pretty badass DS spin-off. But he also directed Ninja Gaiden Sigma 1 and 2, which were re-releases that made a baffling number of unnecessary changes. So when the guy who can't even copy a Ninja Gaiden game to another console without making a laundry list of arbitrary changes, is in charge of a Ninja Gaiden game from the get-go, you know there's trouble ahead. But you know what? One man does not make an entire game by himself, and as much as I'd like to direct all my anger towards this one guy, I have to direct my anger to everyone involved. I blame this guy for finally proving that he just can't direct a good Ninja Gaiden game. I blame Team Ninja's QA department for being asleep during development. I blame Koei for allowing their Dynasty Warriors to seep into the Ninja Gaiden franchise. And while I hate being the guy who shouts ruin forever when a franchise changes in the slightest, the sheer amount of changes and the complete left turn this series has taken makes it hard not to shout that overly used phrase. And considering who's now running the show, I doubt we're going to see the Ninja Gaiden franchise rise from the ashes this time. So rest in peace Ninja Gaiden franchise. We had our fun, but I realize when a developer has thrown a middle finger to the audience it spent 8 years garnering, and while I'll shake my fist angrily towards your new handlers, I can take comfort in the fact that this is the only franchise I love that the new Team Ninja will ruin beyond repair. Oh. Oh no.